America's storyteller Norman Rockwell, an illustrator and artist, conveyed an important message through his paintings and illustrations. He communicated civil rights injustices and brought attention to historic events to acknowledge their significance. As Rockwell gained notoriety as a visual commentator, he used his art to communicate the significance of the civil rights movement and racial inequalities in America, illustrating how we are all equal. We are all part of the human race. Traditionally, Rockwell painted scenes depicting wholesome American values, but his focus shifted after leaving the Saturday Evening Post and he began to highlight social concerns and racial disparity. In 1963, he painted The Problem We All Live With, shining a spotlight on racial inequality in America. By painting the reality of American life, he became a communicator for the obstacles we all must confront, allowing America to have a clearer vision on issues often unobserved. Norman Percival Rockwell was born in 1894 in New York City. He spent summers in the countryside with his family, and these trips impacted his future paintings. Rockwell stated, "I would not have dwelt so long upon these summers I spent in the country, except that I think they had a lot to do with what I painted later on." Rockwell began studying art at an early age. He dropped out of high school but ultimately graduated from the Art Students League. At the age of 19, he was appointed editor of Boys Life magazine. At the age of 22, Rockwell partnered with the Saturday Evening Post, a crucial moment in his art career, ultimately creating 321 magazine covers depicting traditional American values. Rockwell's art illustrates his admiration of everyday American scenes. He said, "I was showing the America I knew and observed to others who might not have noticed." In the midst of his career, he created the infamous Four Freedoms, inspired by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's speech to Congress. Roosevelt presented the reasons for America's involvement in World War II, fighting for the Four Freedoms.
The first is freedom of speech and expression. The second is freedom of every person to worship God in his own way. Third, freedom from want. Fourth is freedom from fear.
Roosevelt intended that his ideas would be publicized throughout America, but the message did not take hold as he predicted. Countless Americans still refused to join the war effort and believed it was futile. A government survey reported that only 50% of Americans knew about the Four Freedoms. Rockwell, however, was greatly influenced by Roosevelt's speech. In response, he produced 4 paintings published consecutively on the covers of the Saturday Evening Post in 1943. Because of these paintings, the public now understood Roosevelt's speech in a new way, and the sales of war bonds escalated to about $130 million. Ben Hibbs, editor of the Saturday Evening Post, stated, "Those 4 pictures quickly became the best known and most appreciated paintings of that era. The American people needed the inspirational message." Despite his lengthy partnership with the Saturday Evening Post, they imposed strict rules on covers he was permitted to paint, only allowing minorities to be seen in servile jobs. In the 1960s, the administration of the Post changed their style to more abstract art. In response, Rockwell wrote to the director, "The work I now want to do no longer fits into the Post scheme." Rockwell's wife also supported the idea of leaving, and he departed from the magazine in 1963. He was able to paint anything he felt strongly about, and his main focus shifted to racial inequality.
He was also very trusted, and he had the ability to create art that helped people to see things in a new way.
2 important court cases influenced the civil rights movement in the South: Plessy v. Ferguson in 1896 and Brown v. Board of Education in 1954. Plessy v. Ferguson ruled that separate but equal public facilities were constitutional. The South used Plessy as a basis for the creation of Jim Crow laws, restricting blacks from having equal rights and using the same public facilities as whites. In 1954, Oliver Brown filed a lawsuit in Topeka, Kansas, after his daughter was denied entry to all white elementary schools. The verdict declared school segregation was unconstitutional, providing educational opportunities for all. Rockwell took his first step in painting civil rights issues with The Problem We All Live With, featuring 6-year-old Ruby Bridges integrating into the New Orleans all-white William Franz public school, escorted by 4 U.S. Marshals. He painted Ruby as an innocent young girl to convey a feeling of empathy and bravery. Every day, Ruby was confronted with enraged crowds screaming brutal slurs. Teachers refused to teach Ruby simply because of the color of her skin.
Parents rushed into the school and went into every classroom and pulled out every child.
The painting's original purpose was to commemorate the 10th anniversary of Brown versus the Board of Education. However, after publication, the painting became a powerful message about racial tensions in society. Rockwell hoped others would understand Ruby's struggles and see a different perspective. He received letters filled with criticism or praise. One reader wrote, "Rockwell's picture is worth 1,000 words. The subject matter will have become history." Another reader wrote, "Vicious lying propaganda being used for the crime of racial integration." Rockwell wasn't deterred, and in 1964, the painting was on the cover of Look magazine. Rockwell communicated inequality in society, and he stood up for what he believed in. One of the most pivotal events in the civil rights movement of the 1960s was the March on Washington, where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave his I Have a Dream speech. About 200,000 people gathered at the National Mall, peacefully protesting racial discrimination and supporting civil rights legislation. In 1964, Rockwell painted Murder in Mississippi, depicting 3 civil rights workers murdered by the Ku Klux Klan and the town sheriff at Mount Zion Methodist Church. In the finished painting, he omitted the KKK and the sheriff to focus on the tragedy of the murder. The painting differs from his others in style, and it became a raw interpretation of the fear and violence blacks faced. He wrote to Alan Hilbert, editor of Look magazine, "I tried in a big way to make it an angry painting." It was published in 1965 with an article, Southern Justice. In 1967, Rockwell painted The New Kids in the Neighborhood, featuring 2 groups of children with a moving truck representing the integration of American suburbs, illustrating American racial advancement. Not all of his civil rights paintings were well received. A reader wrote, "Just where does Norman Rockwell live? Probably in an all-white, highly expensive, highly exclusive neighborhood. What hypocrites all of you are." The criticism he faced was inevitable, but he continued to paint America as he saw it. Countless artists have been inspired by Rockwell's art and style. Contemporary artist Kadir Nelson used Rockwell's paintings as inspiration. He stated, "There are hundreds of artists, but my style has been heavily influenced by Norman Rockwell." Nelson illustrates for magazines such as The New Yorker, depicting African American scenes similar to Rockwell. One of his paintings, Sew Together, was directly inspired by Rockwell's The Golden Rule, conveying multiple ethnicities and equality. In 2011, President Barack Obama requested the painting The Problem We All Live With to be displayed in the White House.
But that I learned a very valuable lesson, and that is that we should never look at a person and judge them by the color of their skin. That's the lesson that I learned in 1st grade.
In 2021, artist Bria Goller created an image integrating Ruby's shadow and Kamala Harris, taking her first steps in making history as the first Black and South Asian female vice president. The image went viral on social media, communicating the historical significance of the 2 events. Rockwell stated, "We find that it is not a new scene which is needed, but a new viewpoint." In 1977, upon Rockwell's receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom, President Ford stated, "His vivid portraits of our country have become a beloved part of the American tradition." Rockwell helped America understand that we are all equals and stood up for what he believed needed to be addressed and changed, communicating racial inequality through his art.